Okay, so today we're having a basic question and answer lesson. You can ask me any question you want, and I will answer it. However, I also have some common questions, so if you don't have any questions right now or need some time to think about a question, that's okay. I have a list of things I'm going to go over that are common. So,
never mind.
If you have a question, raise your hand. If not, I will go into what I have, and then we will feel free to raise your hand along the way. That also works. I do these periodically because I realize that we have a lot of new people coming in and old people leaving, and so as a result of that, we have a lot of turnover of material.
What's the age limit?
Age limit for what?
For this, when do you stop being considered a teen?
18 is when I draw the line.
So the legal
age, yeah.
Okay.
Then I have you join the Adult Writers Club, but the Adult Writers Club, as I said, we meet once a month on the last Thursday of the month, unless it's like a holiday, in which case we meet the Thursday before. Just always check the calendar, see if we're closed that week, and then you'll know it's the Thursday before.
So I can't bring my 21-year-old brother to sit next to me.
Unfortunately, no, but he could come to the Adult Writers Club, and you could come to the Adult Writers Club theoretically, because I would be okay with I'm okay with teens coming to the Adult Writers Club. I'm not okay with adults coming to the Teen Writers Club, just because it's awkward for the adult.
Yeah.
It's less awkward for a younger person to be in a group of older people than the other way around.
I am good with adults. I feel like I'm smarter when I'm around.
A lot of
adults.
teens do. That's why I was like, if you want to join any adults in the Teen Writers Club, or if you're like parent, I know one of the people who just submitted to the Teen Writers Club was like, so my parent wants to join an Adult Writers Club, and I was like, cool, like that's great, do it. So like, by all means, and if you ever have any questions about those kinds of things, feel free to ask. I am an open book. Any other questions as far as writing goes, this club goes, concepts about writing in general? If not, again, I have a list, so you can always think while I go off on my list tangent.
Well, I'm writing this book, this story, and I think I started it at the wrong place, so I was going to start it...
I can understand that.
Yeah, I was going to start it before, so... Because my characters, I felt like they knew each other too well, and I didn't really want to fix that. And I feel like they didn't have enough like personal reason to go fight these bad guys, other than
that is really important.
They're in like this organization that like fights these bad guys. I haven't even come up with the names of any of the organizations.
That's okay. World building can come later. World building is one of those things that you can definitely fix in post. You don't have to worry about it. As far as going with writing and struggling with being in the wrong place, I definitely think you need to have motive for the characters to do it.
Yeah, so I'm gonna
You can't just shove them.
I'm gonna have the bad guys like do something to
personal
to their organization or village or something. I will make it personal. It is personal.
Exactly. And on top of that, it's important to follow the in late out early rule, which is where you start into the action late and you leave the action a little early.
We talked about that.
Yeah.
The tween offers boot camp. Yeah.
Yep. It's important. It's a good rule of thumb. However, if you start too late, that can also be a problem.
Yeah, I'm like.
So it's like, I would say if you wanted to tweak the rule, you could say enter fashionably late. Like lightly late, not like so late that you're like, oh my gosh, the world's about to explode. That's too late. That's too far. You don't. It's kind of like when you're going to a party, right? Being 10 to 15 minutes late, perfectly acceptable. Showing up 2 minutes before it's over, not okay. Generally not good. So I agree with you. I think that that's a good move, and that rewriting it from before and a slightly earlier point is definitely a good idea.
Yeah, because I edited this chapter that I wrote when I was very tired, and it was the reasonings were kind of like
I feel that tired reasoning goes, yes, this is perfect, and to awake you goes, what?
He's like, I'm gonna scare these guys, and then he reaches in his bag and he's looking for something to scare them, and then he's like, I'm a ghost.
And you're just like, okay then, tired me, and tired you goes, I'm a genius. And awake you just is like,
yeah, so then he pulls out this book of like supernatural, and he's like, I think I'm gonna be a ghost, and then he's like, I don't wanna take these people's sheets from their castle and put tomatoes on them.
What?
So I'm going. No. I'm not explaining a lot of the context.
That's
here.
okay. Hence the confusion.
But he's staying in this castle with his two friends from the organization, and he's staying in this really fancy room. Whoa, what just happened? Okay. He's staying in this really fancy room, and he wants to scare these two guys because he would probably risk his life just to have a laugh. Because So basically, he's like looking in his bag, and he's like, I got this book from my father, and what does it say? And then he looks, and he's like, werewolves. No, that sounds like wolves with an extra syllable. And then he's like, vampires. And then he turns to that page and finds that he doesn't much like the idea of pretending to suck people's blood.
I mean, generally most people don't like that idea, and if you do, I'm a little concerned.
Well, yeah.
Squints.
So he finds this thing on ghosts, and he's like, wow, I'm a ghost now. And then he's like, wait a minute, I have to like smash tomatoes on these nice, clean, white, pristine sheets. And then he's like, that's not gonna work. I can't like steal from their kitchen and do that. But then he decides that being a zombie is a better idea because, yeah, and so.
Long story short, it sounds like a lot of complications. I don't blame you. I would say a lot of times that happens even when you're awake sometimes, where you're like, that makes perfect sense logically, and then later you're like, wait a minute. So it's okay to go back and re-edit, for sure.
Yeah.
Any other questions that, yes, question, go for it.
Sometimes when I'm writing,
Yeah.
I feel like I put too much of my own personalities on the characters.
Very common.
So sometimes I make the character's brave and smart, and when it gets to a moment where he has to do something courageous, I'm like, no, don't do it. Then I just put something that
And you're like, wait, but they would do it. yeah, I totally get that.
So I have no idea what to do in that moment.
I would say the best thing that you can do is if you're making the characters too much like yourself, because sometimes I've noticed, especially with teen authors, it's really hard. I had this problem myself, creating original characters because of the fact that you're too in your own head and you have to get out of your own head sometimes. So what I would highly recommend in order to get out of your own head is to practice making characters that are like your friends and family. The reason why is because you know them really, really well still, but at the same time they aren't you. And so as a result of that, you can practice getting out of your own head and having characters that make decisions that you wouldn't make, but you know they would make because they are like your friends and family members. It may seem weird at first, being like, especially if you're doing the animal rap, being like, this cat is like my mom, or whatever. Like, that might seem weird. But I promise, the more you practice writing characters that are like the people you know, instead of like yourself, the more practice you'll get creating characters that are nothing like you and nothing like the people you know, because you'll be able to practice being outside of that. Does that make sense?
I'm
Yeah.
going to go to the bathroom.
Go ahead.
One thing that kind of helps me when I'm having these kind of originality with the characters and put my own opinion is that I try to find a real character, book, movie, or even
That's
real
also
life
true.
that I get this character and I try to kind of copy
How
it.
are they similar?
Yeah, how are they similar and get it to put on the book.
For sure, absolutely. There are a lot of character personas too, where they're very similar but not quite the same. For sure, I completely agree. I think that analyzing literature is another fantastic one. With that, the only thing you have to be careful of is making them too similar to the book, because then people will start being like, oh, that's just Hermione. But at the same time, that is definitely a good way of doing things. You just have to make sure you give them their own tweaks that make them their own original person. For sure. Any other questions people have? Yes.
What's the hardest thing, writing thing to get into? Like poetry, novels, short stories, that kind of stuff.
Oh, by get into, do you mean traditionally published or period published? Just publish in general? Okay. I would say publishing in general, no matter what, is difficult. I would probably say, though, that publishing short stories is the easiest because there are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of magazines out there that are constantly looking for short story writers, and everyone wants to write novels. So as a result of that, there's not a lot of high demand for that, but they need it. It doesn't mean that you're going to automatically succeed. There are still, I've gotten plenty of rejections on my short stories as well as plenty of acceptance letters. So it's about 50-50. But I will say it's been a lot easier for me querying and trying to get published short story-wise than I've ever heard for novels or poetry. The main reason why is, like I said, supply and demand. I would say for poetry, that's also second. So I'd say short stories first being the easiest, poetry being second. Poetry being second only because of the fact that everyone has different opinions on poetry. And so as a result, that can get really tricky, finding the person with the same opinions as you. So you can be like, I love this poem, and you can have several other people be like, I love this poem. And then like 4 other people are like, I don't like this specific kind of poem. And so that one's a little bit trickier just because it's very much stylistic. It's kind of like saying everyone likes Greek food. Not everyone likes Greek food. So it's hard. Novels, unfortunately, I would say is the hardest. The reason why is because everyone loves the idea of writing their own series. I mean, who doesn't? I do. You do. We do. Right? Like, but I would say it also depends on what route you're going. With short stories and poetry, you definitely want to probably go the traditional route, because of the fact that poetry and short stories actually have a lot harder time making money unless you go the traditional route. Whereas with novels, it's all about the marketing if you publish independently. With independent publishing, it's all up to your budget and your marketing skills. Whereas with publishing traditionally, it's all up to you being very, very stubborn. Because you just got to send query letter after query letter after query letter after query letter after query letter. It's a long process. But once you get an agent, then it's much less of a long process. It's just getting to that point. If you want, I can talk more about indie versus traditional publishing, or we can just leave it at novels are hard, but don't give up, please. Especially because of the fact that I would definitely say, as a teenager, a lot more people are willing to accept poetry and short stories than novels because they immediately assume you're less experienced, which I think is terrible and rude. Because I've seen some really great teen authors. We were talking about what is hardest to publish, and I was saying the easiest to publish is short story and poetry, especially for teens, because people generally assume that teens can't write novels, which is rude. Exactly! I'm like, this is rude. That's not okay. Like, yes, are there people who struggle because they don't have a lot of experience? Yes, but that's not everyone, and it's rude to assume it's everyone. Exactly. It is an ageism thing, unfortunately. There is a lot of ageism in publishing. All of a sudden when you say, yes, I'm a 24-year-old man, they're totally fine. But when you're like, yes, I'm a 14-year-old, when I'm a 14-year-old boy or girl, all of a sudden they're like, squints at you funny. Like, oh, you could have written the exact same book. This? Exactly. You could have written the exact same book, and they are going to be like, you sure? Like, so, yeah. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I will definitely say as a teenager, it is easier to indie publish, especially if you're good at marketing and you have parents who are willing to support you budget-wise.
What's indie publishing?
Great question. Do you have any other questions?
No.
Not right now. Okay, I will dive into that. All right, indie versus traditional. This is a very common question, and I actually had it on my list of common questions. So, sweet. So, indie publishing. This means you do everything by yourself or hire someone else in order to do it.
Oh, my brother loves this book series called All for the Game, and it's self-published like that.
And for sure, there are lots of great self-published books, but it is very hard to make money doing it because the traditional benefit is the fact that they pay for the editor for you. They pay for the cover designer for you. They pay for the marketing for you. So as a result of that, it makes it so much easier for you to just sit back, relax, and write another book, right? Whereas with indie, you have to be constantly marketing your book. You have, on average, you have to market your book at least 3 times a week on some sort of social media platform in order to have people buy it.
Right.
It's intense. And even then, you probably want to be posting daily, just maybe don't post about your book every day. It's really kind of a rough game of it. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. You absolutely can make it as an indie author. It's very doable. It's just going to take a lot more work on your end. Granted, traditional publishing takes a different kind of work. It takes polishing your own draft by self-editing, or hiring a professional editor because you don't know how to fix it. You know something's wrong and you don't know how to fix it. Or alternatively, it also takes writing a query letter and possibly even having someone edit a query letter. Because of so that's a great question. A query letter is how you introduce your novel. Basically, it's saying, "Hi, this is me. This is my book. I hope you like it," except more fancy.
Okay.
So with a query letter, that's basically what you send. You don't send your manuscript when you're querying. You just send that letter. With your letter, you want to include your word count, you want to include your genre, you want to include the title, and you want to include a small blurb about the book. Pretty much what would be on the back of the book, more than likely. Some people also ask for a synopsis, which is basically an in-detail summary of your plot in less than 500 words. Yeah. Hence why I was like, traditional also takes a lot of work, but it's all work up front. Once you're done with the upfront work, then you can relax. Whereas indie, it is perpetual.
Yeah.
You're forever working towards it. But hey, if that's what you want to do, that's great. I've seen so many traditional authors make it, but I have also seen a lot of indie authors make it. I actually have several clients that I've worked with, since I am an editor professionally as well, who have like 7,000 followers on Instagram now and are doing fantastic. But that also, they put a lot of work into that. It's been like 3 years to get to that point. So it's a lot of work. It's doable though. Please do not get discouraged and say, oh, indie's too hard. Indie's just different. Indie's just
different.
Exactly, it's built different. If you aren't good at, let's put it this way, if you aren't good at marketing yourself, if you are shy and terrified of people, go traditional. Because when you're indie, you gotta be like, hi, here's my book, please buy it.
That's exactly what I'm gonna do.
So you gotta make sure.
Traditional.
And so if you wanna, so there's nothing wrong with either of these options.
Or.
Just keep in mind, if you're shy, traditional's your bet. If you're a social butterfly or a semi-social butterfly, indie's probably actually okay for you.
Hire me and I will market your book.
That is also true.
And then I will be like, buy this book, it's written by this amazing author. And they'll be like, wow.
With publishing, it's just about what you want. The other thing is the pros and cons. So the con, unfortunately, here is that obviously you have to do all the work all the time. That is, unfortunately, a deficit. Whereas the con for traditional is that you don't get to choose what editor you work with. So if you hate your editor, I'm sorry. You're stuck with them. And on top of that, if you hate your cover design, I'm sorry, you also have to take it.
Oh, I know. I've seen some cover designs, and I'm like, I mean, like, I'm not the author, but like,
right,
they don't really fit.
No, and there are times where I even love the cover design, and the author doesn't. There was one author who came in who was traditionally published during my creative writing program, and she was all like, I'm so excited, my cover's getting a redesign, I hate the old cover. And I'm sitting there like, I think your cover's beautiful. But she was like sitting there like, she said she literally almost cried when she saw her cover.
Oh
she was like, she hated it so much. But now that she's got it a lot more famous, they're willing to do a redesign.
The Harry Potter books, there's so many. There's too many.
Yep, there are a lot of redesigns for that, and it's because they're popular. Unfortunately, that is the one thing. You don't get a redesign until your book's popular. So they'll give you your cover, and if you hate it, you just have to say, I'm sorry. Unless there's a drastic problem with it, like if the character is supposed to be a, let's go with cats because you have cats. If the main character is supposed to be a black cat and they made it a bright red cat, you would have to be like, okay, that's okay to fix. That's okay to tell them that they need to fix it. But if it's something just like, I don't like the font, or this character looks a little too grumpy in this picture, they're going to be like,
well,
whatever.
Deal with it.
Exactly, deal with it. So that is the one unfortunate problem with traditional is that you do not have a lot of creative freedom because you're not the one paying them. The publishing company's paying them, which means that they get to decide. But that's indie versus traditional. It's a lot of fun. I gotta say, either way, they're both really good. I will say, though, that with traditional, they are getting a lot more picky. That is another reason why so many indie authors are arising, is because of the fact that there have been lots of people that have tried to publish their book through traditional means, and they've just been incredibly picky because they're getting more people trying to publish, and they actually have less resources to publish. So as a result of that, they have to pick less manuscripts. Whereas before it was like, if you have potential, we'll take it. Now it's like, if you are not the cream of the crop, the best of this particular section, sorry. And it really sucks. When I worked for a traditional publishing company, that was the hardest part. There was times where I was like, this one should definitely be in the top 5, and they're like, you can only choose 4. And I'm like, yeah, it's still number 5. And I'm like, dang it, but I want it to be it. I want it to get published. I think it's good. It's just not quite as good as these other 4. And it was really hard. I was like, if I had to grade it, it would have lost by 1 point. Come on, 1 point, man. Like,
I know.
It's not fair. Anyway, it's hard. Like, it's definitely hard. Please know that there are people who care about your book, even if it doesn't seem like they do. Also, when you try to traditionally publish, if you try to traditionally publish, please know that some people will be nice and some people will be not nice. The not nice people are not worth your time.
You cannot choose what feedback they send you. You can choose how you react to it.
Exactly. If they decide to be an absolute butt and be super, super mean, that's on them. That doesn't mean they're right about it. Then please do not self-internalize. And if they give you a lot of feedback, don't assume that means your book's bad either. That's not true. For example, the book that I gave the rejection for that barely missed the cutoff, I specifically said, here are the problems in your novel, but here's all the things I loved about it too. But not a lot of people do that. Most of the people just list problems. So if they just list a bunch of problems, please know that doesn't mean your book is bad. That just means if you fixed those things, it could be better.
I have a lunch lady friend from my school that I've gotten her emails, so I email her some chapters, and the one that I just wrote, I asked for some advice for like chapters before the first chapter.
Yeah.
And like an idea for a chapter name, because I don't know what to name it.
No, for sure. Sometimes that's the hardest part, is naming things.
But it's nice to have like somebody who I can send it to. Because like when I first read that chapter, it was terrible, and I was like, I cannot.
It's
this is
important
terrible.
to get feedback.
I'm probably gonna delete this. And then she was like, I love your words. You're so beautiful and awesome. And I'm like, I love you.
And you're like, thank you. It's important that you get people who will both be supportive, but also will tell you, hey, here's the things that you can fix, because that's important. Both of those are important. It's important to have support, but it's also important to know how to best work with your chapters to make them even better.
Yeah, so I rewrote it, and it's okay now. I can make it better, but
progress.
It's better than before.
All right, any other questions about writing? If not, I like I said, I have some common ones here. But feel free. I'll give you about 10 seconds. Yes, question.
I have a question. In one of my books, I decided to use the setting of a country and use its language and stuff.
Yeah.
Wait.
You're okay. I actually wanted to. It reminded me of something with Celia. So if you need to answer a call, that's okay.
I like your phone.
That's not my phone. That's my sister's phone.
I like
She's
your sister's phone.
She's out on a trip, and my brother he put a lot of his contacts of his friend, and one of his friends just called out nothing.
Rip. You're like, Anyway, so what was your question?
My question was that when I'm writing a book in one language, but it's in a country of another language, I'm trying to mix both. How do I do that? How do I pick
the best way to do it would just be to say they are speaking in this language and then put it in whatever language you want the book to be in. Purely because of the fact that most people don't like having translated stuff. It's actually quite frustrating for the reader.
There's a book that I kind of wanted to read, but it has some like Spanish things, and I like it.
I don't speak Spanish. Yeah, it's okay if you do it every once in a while, like if you have them call their grandmother abuela or things like that. That's fine.
Yeah, people
but
know
like if
that.
it's a whole sentence in Spanish, it's like I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's why in movies they have subtitles in English. So pretty much it's the same thing in a novel. Basically how you do subtitles in English in a novel is say, the man spoke in very thick Arabic, but I was able to understand him, and then you say it in English.
Yeah.
So as a result, you've already specified it's in Arabic, but for the reader's benefit, it's now in English or whatever language
And
you're
you
writing
can
in.
do that in a subtle way if you
Yeah.
want.
Exactly. Like I said, you can introduce it as if you're just accentuating his accent. Like I said, very thick Arabic accent. It's like, that's cool. Seems like a detail, but in reality, it's telling you, hey, this guy's speaking in Arabic. Or alternatively, you can say, I didn't really know the language, and therefore I was a little baffled when I arrived in India or something like that. And then as a result, you've already established that most people here will be speaking not English. So I would say just specify it beforehand, or alternatively, if they're animals, you can always do like the Warrior series does, where they make it very clear that, like, yes, all these characters are speaking in English, but they're cats. So when they run into humans, it's like meow, 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 meow. And then you're like, it's very obvious that they have no idea what the cats are saying. These are not magical cats. These are normal cats that we just happen to understand because we're reading.
Are you sure? They're warrior cats.
That's fair. They are magical later on. So anyway, series 3 got real wild.
Hey, I'm reddish.
I'm just saying it got real wild. Anyway, I also wanted to add on to your question earlier. Novellas are a totally different ballgame.
What's that?
Novella is when it is between 20,000 to 35,000 words. Sorry, my coworker was waving at me. Hi. So it is shorter than a novel, but at the same time it's longer than a short story. With a novella, the benefit of it is the fact that a lot more publishing houses are taking novellas now because of the fact that they realize they have minimal resources for printing. Printing is expensive. Printing is hard. So as a result, if they can pump out a ton of novellas, it's great because then they can have less of a stress of all the printing costs. So, long story short, I would say novels. If you want to go for novels, go for novels. But if you're also looking to ease your way into the publishing industry, novellas are actually a great way to do it because of the fact that they are right on the cusp of both. And so if they like your novellas, you can then go, hey, I have this novel. And they're much more likely to take your novel because you've already eased your way into the publishing industry. So there is that.
I also was wondering, like, what about, like, is there any difference between children or young adults or adults?
Absolutely. Age range. And are you talking again about, like, trying to get into it, or?
I don't know.
No, you're okay. Publishing in general. I like to know specifics. So, with publishing in general, I would say, okay, going back to Indian traditional. Trad. We're going to call it trad, traditional publishing trad now. All right, indie publishing is best for young adult, and specifically genre-wise, romance.
Yup.
Whereas traditional is going to be better for children's literature, middle grade, YA, and adult is actually really hard to get into. So as a result of that, I would highly recommend if you're doing a children's book, like a little cutesy picture book, 100% go traditional. It's really hard to do independent with children's books. Is it possible? Yes, but it's really hard. I follow a lot of indie and traditional children's book writers, and the indie authors have such a hard time, especially because of the fact that they have a lot of people who order their books not really knowing what they're about, and then get the book and then go, sorry, this really wasn't what we thought it was, and then return it. And it's just, it's frustrating. It's frustrating watching them go through it. I can't even imagine going through it. Middle grade is also easier to do with traditional, because of the fact that, again, it just markets better because they know how to market to the parents. Because with middle grade, you're pretty much marketing to the parents because middle grade people don't generally have enough money to go buy books. So you're marketing to the parents most of the time.
The
So with that, I would
library.
yeah, exactly, the library as well. And with young adult, it's on both sides because it equally does well in both categories. As far as romance goes, the reason why it's actually easier to do independent is because of the fact that romance is so widely loved that it's easy to find readers. It's not that hard.
Definitely. You just post, like, I've seen, like, so many.
Exactly, where they're just like,
things.
yes, exactly. He reaches over and touches her face, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, I want to read it! And it's like, nothing bad
And
about
I'm
that.
like, I hate this. Bye.
Yeah, exactly. And that's okay if you don't like romance. I'm just saying, a lot of people are like, they see romance books and they go, ooh, yay, another romance book. Especially because romance readers tend to read very intensely. They'll just read and read and read and read and
I
read.
know. I can't
And
even
so,
imagine.
I actually work with a romance author who is independent, and she is doing fabulously well. She sends me a book every single month to edit. It's quite fascinating how fast she writes. But anyway, but
That's
the point
kind of
is,
scary.
it is kind of it's impressive. It's scary impressive is what it is. But yeah, point being though is she's able to do that because of the fact that romance is such a big genre that she can just afford to pump out those books, and people will just keep taking them.
I know. I don't feel like
So-
they really nitpick a lot in romance.
They don't. As long as the romance is good and it's not absolutely terrible, people really just want a good romance. They don't care
Yeah.
if it's super, super high quality. They just want a good romance. Anyway, that being said, this is what I would say typically as far as genre goes. I will say though, with middle grade and traditional publishing, currently there is a massive surge in middle grade. We went from, even at the library I saw it. At the library we went from having maybe 10 to 20 new middle grade books a month to having around from 50 to 100 middle grade books a month.
Jeez. I won't have a hard time here.
So as a result of that, I will say it is high competition. Like, is it better to do traditional with middle grade? Yes. But it's also really high competition with middle grade. I would definitely say children's and young adult are going to be lower competition, purely because of the fact that there is less than middle grade currently, but either is doable. It's not to say that it's not doable, it's just harder or less hard. I would also say currently the trend is, most trends only last about 10 years, so you have about another 9 before this changes. Currently the trend is a new genre that I actually wanted to talk about today because it is accepted as a new genre, Romantasy. You probably heard this term. It was a term made up by book talkers and then has been
course it
accepted
was.
into the traditional publishing vernacular.
Oh my gosh. No.
So, basically the difference is there's fantasy books with romance in them, right? That's not romantasy. That is fantasy with a romance subplot. Romantasy is when you have a fantasy backdrop for a romance novel. Was this a thing before? Yes. But has it become the new trend?
popularized.
Exactly. It is now booming and blossoming and become absolutely massive in the market. And it will probably stay that way for the next 9 years. Then at that point it'll probably drop off. So if you're interested at all in writing romance books with a fantasy backdrop, by all means, now's your time
Both in fashion,
to give it a try.
changes too often.
Unfortunately, it does. Hence
Then it
why I
just-
said 10 years is the gap, and then it changes.
Then it just goes back
Yep.
around.
And then it changes, yeah, for sure. It changes again and again and again. It's like dystopian. I actually had a client that I worked with that independently published because of the fact that she missed the trend gap for dystopian by 2 years. And so as a result, they told her, sorry, we're not publishing any more dystopians anymore. It's out.
Rip.
Didn't even bother looking at her novel, didn't even bother seeing if it was any good. They just said, dystopian's no longer on trend, hon. And I'm just like, excuse me.
No, stop.
Yeah. And so that's another reason why novellas are becoming more and more popular, because then you can hit the trends hard and fast, cost less. In general, they can do it better, but they don't have to worry about issues like that. But yeah, I would say absolutely, if you're getting the same answer of it's no longer on trend and that's why we're not publishing it, I would recommend indie publishing. Because people don't care in indie, they just want the book. They don't care if there's a trend or not. If they want dystopian, they want dystopian. They're gonna take it. Granted, I will say with indie, like I said, you gotta hire your own editor, you gotta hire your own cover designer, and yes, you have to do both of those things if you want your book to actually be successful, unfortunately. Or you have to find an editor friend or a book designer friend. And when I say book designer friend, I mean someone who actually is capable of doing book design because they got a degree in it. The reason why I'm specifying that is because of the fact that book designers that are professional for traditionals take years and years and years learning the trends, learning what's new, learning what looks good, learning what is best on a cover, learning what is going to draw the eye of the reader. If your book only looks okay designed, your readers are going to go, which is sad because your book might be the best book ever, but if it has a not so good cover, people assume the writing's also not so good. So you do have to hire a professional cover designer. I would highly recommend it. I've seen people have an unprofessional cover and then change it to a professional cover, and their sales immediately skyrocket. It's unfortunately part of it. Question.
That's funny because they say don't judge a book by its cover.
But everyone does. Everybody does.
Everybody.
It's just a fact of life. You will judge a book by its cover. Everyone's guilty of it. Heck, even I'm guilty of it. I don't judge a book by its cover content-wise, but I do immediately know if a book is independently published, generally based on how good the cover is. Unfortunately.
The False Prince covers I saw and was like, I don't like them so much, but it was for like this reading contest thing that I did for my school, so I picked it up and I read it and I was like, wow.
I have to admit, I was surprised that the False Prince covers were so bland.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
I was like, that's not the series.
And yet that is still better than some of the non-professional covers that I've seen. So that being said, and even then, I will say I should clarify. I almost always know I know a book's indie if the cover's bad, but there are some times when I see a good cover and I can't tell if it's traditional or not, and I have to look it up. And that always makes me excited because I'm like, you spent money on this. You did a good job. Like, good for you. Like, so, yes, question.
When you roll over there, the young adults, middle grade, is it the range of age the book is?
Yes.
Or, okay.
So, middle grade is going to be anywhere from age 9 to age 12. There's lower middle grade and upper middle grade. Lower middle grade is anywhere from 9 to anywhere from 8 to 10 technically, but 9 is generally where they start it. And then anywhere from 11 to 12 is going to be upper middle grade. So when you think upper middle grade, think Harry Potter, think Percy Jackson, things like that. When you think lower middle grade, think like the Daisy Meadows fairy books and things like that. So there's or Magic Treehouse is also lower middle grade. So that's going to be the difference there is what age range are you marketing towards. Young adult is going to be 13-year-olds to 17-year-olds. There's now this new genre as well called new adult that is also incredibly popular. That is going to be anywhere from 19 to 25-year-olds. Then you have adult, which is just 26 plus. And honestly, I believe you can write in any age range, no matter your physical age, but you may get some weird stares if you're trying to write an adult novel as a teenager. You can do it. I've seen people do it. I've worked with teenagers that have written incredibly deep content, but you will get some weird stares. You'll get some publishers going,
like 14-year-old writing a 26 plus novel.
But it can happen. It's just, you're gonna get some weird looks. So,
intrigued.
But yeah. So that's what I meant with those. You also want to make sure, if you are traditionally publishing, that you add that to your query letter. What is the age range? Because if they don't publish in your age range or aren't publishing in your age range right now, then they're immediately going to put it in the rejection pile, unfortunately. So if you're like, hey, I'm doing a middle grade novel, and you submitted it to a company that only does young adult, they aren't even going to bother reading the rest. It's actually really sad. So definitely make sure you check what age range they publish, what genres they publish, and what they describe their stuff as. For example, Monster Ivy, the place that I worked for 9 months, I believe it was, for traditional publishing, they specifically do Dark fantasy.
What? Oh, dark. I thought you said dog fantasy.
No, dark fantasy,
Alright,
as in like
alright.
spooky, scary fantasy.
Spooky, scary skeletons.
But the thing is, they also like to have it be age appropriate. So they originally were doing middle grade, but now they've had so many middle grade submissions that they're now doing young adult and adult. And so you got to make sure you keep updated on what they're doing. That being said, I also would recommend reading a few of the things that they have published, because that'll give you an idea of what kind of style they're looking for. What kind of feel do they want to the book? And if your book doesn't have the same feel, they're probably not for you, and that's okay.
I know like 2 publishing companies, and I read the books from them, and I really liked them.
Mm-hmm.
I only remember 2 because
Now I'm scared to ask.
it's just Simon and Schuster and Aladdin.
Aladdin
Oh, and
is
Shadow
slightly
Mountain.
less. Yeah. Oh, and Shadow Mountain. There we go. I'm sorry.
Shadow
The reason why I'm
Mountain publishes
simultaneously
Wizard
smiling
for
and
Hire.
grimacing is because those are 3 of the hardest ones to get into.
I'm just saying
That's
I
why
just
you've heard of
remember
them. No, yeah, for sure. I'm just saying that's why you've heard of them, is because they're some of the hardest to get into.
Because Shadow Mountain published like my
Because they're
favorite
that
series
popular.
ever.
Yes, exactly. They unfortunately, that is the one thing about going with higher end publishing companies that you've heard of, is that it's more likely that they are going to A, not put as much effort into your book because you are new and so they're scared. B, they're also going to be harder to get into because your competition is going to be stiff because everyone else wants to go there too. So you might have 2,000 submissions and you are one of 2,000 submissions. Exactly. That just got a whole lot harder. Not saying it's impossible. 100% it's possible, but just know that if you're aiming for any of those big publishing houses, the competition is going to be stiff. You're going to want to make sure your novel is as polished as it can possibly be, and your query letter is spick and span before you send it in. Because you need your best shot. Give them your all, because that's what you got to give them if you want to make it there. It is hard. Any other questions regarding publishing or writing or anything else related or adjacent to? Erasing stuff that I've already covered on accident via other questions. It's kind of funny that I kind of knew what questions you might ask.
Can read our minds.
A little bit. I also just know kind of what questions I typically would ask, which helps. Alright, I'm gonna mention a few things. Let me know if you want me to talk about them or if you already kind of know about them. The difference between a soft magic system and a hard magic system.
What? I have no idea what that means.
Great, then I'm going to talk about it.
I could probably guess, but that's not the answer. Guessing is not the answer.
Magic system.
So with magic systems, so in other words, if you are a fantasy author, this will be important.
Good, I'm listening.
Yeah.
So, a soft magic system. This is common for contemporary novels. That means that it is set in, that was horrible handwriting. Let me try again.
Round 2.
There we go. This is much more common with contemporary novels. You can do it with a hard magic system, but it's a lot less likely because contemporary is modern day. So as a result, the idea of having a soft magic system is much more applicable because we don't know about magic, right? So it's a lot more easy to assume, hey, this magic exists. It's just such a soft, gentle magic that you don't really notice it.
Like Wizard for Hire. You should read Wizard
Exactly,
for
and
Hire.
things like
It's so
that.
good.
I haven't read it, but I am familiar with the idea.
So good. I'm
Anyway,
sorry, I love it.
But that being said, so soft magic systems are generally ones without a lot of rules. They may have a few rules, but they're generally very gentle rules, very general rules. Like a great example with Harry Potter. You have to have a wand in order to use magic. You might have laws within that society doing other bigger things, but generally they have to have a wand to use their magic. Can they do it without?
Unless
Yes.
they're special.
But
Feels
it's really,
different.
really hard. So it helps channel their magic. That's a soft magic system. They also generally, with soft magic systems, so I'll say less rules as well, they also generally don't affect the world that much. They're generally much more like oh, hey, the world's not being affected, but my life's being affected. So this is another great example of ones like vampires and things like that, where it's like, my world, because I'm a vampire, is being affected, but because vampires are rare, it's not affecting the whole world. So, less world problems. The other thing with soft magic systems is that generally they are more the background. They are not the sole focus. Or if they are the sole focus, you build a world around it. So for example, like with Harry Potter, where there are a lot of modern things happening in Harry Potter, right? But at the same time, exactly, they're driving cars, they're going on trains, yada yada yada. But at the same time, because they go to the magic school and because they go to other places where it's safe for wizards to be, there's a lot of world building there. But even then, it's a background for Harry to then focus and, defeat Voldemort. It's more of a way of focusing there rather than the sole plot, right? Magic is not the plot. Him using the magic to defeat Voldemort is the plot. Ultimately, even if he didn't use magic to defeat Voldemort, it would still be a soft magic system. Even more so because of the fact that he could fight Voldemort without magic, theoretically, if they didn't wield magic. There are lots of novels out there where it's like, we can ride dragons, but for whatever reason, we don't have access to this thing, therefore we have to fight each other in actual combat. Or alternatively, they have small bits of magic where they can send letters via magic and stuff like that. Or they can, a great example of this is actually, can't remember the title, but it's by Mary Robinette Kowal. She was actually one of the first Romantasy authors, funnily enough, but she actually didn't hit the trend. She did it before the trend. She was one of those people. Before her time. Fancy. But anyway, but that being said, it's very much a soft magic system because the idea is Regency romance, but with magic. So they can use it to make their ball gowns prettier and use it to make their voices sound different and things like that. So it's very soft magic that isn't really influencing their lives, but at the same time, it is a part of the background. Meanwhile, hard magic system.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Because
rules. That's the main difference. With a hard magic system, there are rules on rules on rules on rules on rules on rules, and you just keep going and you're like, by the way, if they have this specific crystal, then they can do this. Unless the crystal's cracked in half, exactly 3 centimeters, then they can do this. And it's that's a hard magic system where it's whoa.
Okay, never mind. I think I know what kind of system the book is now.
Yeah. So, hard magic system is typically Brandon Sanderson, where it's you need a Bible dictionary to translate, or just need to be really good at remembering things because he has so many specific rules. If you notice, he even has sometimes a guide in the front of the book to tell you how it works because
I love
it's
when
so
I have
complicated.
that because I'm like, yay, and then I figure out it's complicated. I'm like, no.
You're like,
could you give an example of a story?
Brandon Sanderson.
Other than Brandon Sanderson.
Other than Brandon Sanderson. Sorry, I'm like, he's the main one. He's the biggest one. There are other ones, but I will say he's the biggest one known for hard fantasy magic system. I gotta think of others because honestly, he is the biggest pain in the butt when it comes to. No offense, he writes good stuff, but he also is the biggest pain in the butt when it comes to hard fantasy. He is very good at hard fantasy.
Name of a book, actually.
Oh, gotcha. You mean the name of his specific book,
yeah.
Mistborn. So he writes the Mistborn trilogy as well as Warbreaker, as well as Stormlight Archives, and all of those ones are very rules heavy, very much this is how the magic system works, and this is how it will always work.
Okay, yeah, because Wizard for Hire, they're more vague about it. They're magic is everywhere,
yes,
and
that's a great one.
They're I'm a wizard, but I still drive to McDonald's and stuff.
Exactly, that's a soft magic system.
Yeah.
It's very vague, it's very unsure. You have a lot of rules that you're I'm not even sure I quite understand this rule, but that's okay.
Yeah, and then he's I go to Corfelt when I feel like it, and Ozzy's huh? Are you good, bro?
Are you okay? But yeah, so with hard magic system, basically all the rules are laid out very intricately and the world building is super intense. With Harry Potter, for instance, you maybe know 3 magical locations, right? Whereas with
Hogwarts.
hard world building, you have, whereas with this, the world is super important, and they build it so intricately that you are completely immersed in this world. That's why a lot of people wonder, where does Lord of the Rings sit?
Oh!
So, Lord of the Rings is technically a soft magic system, but it has a lot of hard world building, which is why a lot of people think it sits in between.
Yeah.
It's on the fence. It doesn't know where to sit. It's like that person who's like, I'm not a popular kid, but I'm also not the jock kid, so I'm like, I'm gonna sit at this table randomly in between.
Yeah, I'm like, what's up? And people are like, huh?
Just like, I'm just gonna sit here, and everyone else can be wherever they want. That being said, epic fantasy does tend to do a lot more hard fantasy. So if you're doing epic fantasy, aka novels that are at least 100,000 words.
High fantasy?
High fantasy is different, actually. Let me explain. So, epic fantasy is when it's at least 100,000 words. That's absolute minimum. And it has to have a hard magic system, it has to have a lot of rules to the magic system, and it has to have intense world building. High fantasy is Lord of the Rings, where its concept might be vague magically, but it has a ton of world building still. So those are those sitting on the fence ones. Bye! Bye! So, that being said, those that sit on the fence, like Lord of the Rings, are definitely going to be high fantasy, because it means that the world is really well built, but the magic system, not so much. And that's okay. With soft fantasy, that's just going to be your basic fantasy.
I think I can distinguish what this book that I have not really started writing. I wrote the first chapter, but I need to rewrite it. But
yeah,
I think it's gonna be soft fantasy because the main bad guy has magic and he uses that, but the world building is very much
gentle, vague.
Well, I know I try to world build that one. That one is when I worked on it with my friends and we spent all recess for half the year world building that.
Yeah.
So I don't even know because I feel like it's
so in that case it might be high fantasy just because high fantasy tends to have either really intense magic system or really intense world and then pick and choose from the other side.
Yeah.
So you can either have a really vague world building or a really vague magic and a really hard world and really hard rules, and you can mix and match for sure, but that would make it high fantasy.
Trying to keep it from crossing over into sci-fi.
In that case, that's a totally different ballgame.
And stop! I need you to be fantasy. There's not a whole bunch of magic. They don't use magic to solve their problems.
Oh, gotcha.
But they it's more of a.
It could also be a sci-fi fantasy. There are sci-fi fantasies.
There is?
Yes.
Where? Do you have a book that I could read so I can?
I can certainly Google a bunch for you.
Okay,
yes.
Great.
There are sci-fi fantasies. Basically, the whole idea is that there are a lot of scientific explanations for certain types of magic, but there are also types of magic that they just still have no idea. Funnily enough, a good example of sci-fi fantasy in movies is, funnily enough, Thor. The reason why is because there's a lot of magic that they can't explain, but there's also a lot of magic that they do explain in scientific terms. And so as a result, it's both. But anyway, that being said, if no one else needs it, I'm going to erase off the board. But yes, I'd be more than happy to Google a bunch of sci-fi fantasies for you because they exist, I assure you. They are just not the most prevalent genre. It's kind of like steampunk, or what's it called? There's this specific genre that I almost never see anything of it. Steampunk I do see, but there's this one specific genre of steampunk that I almost never see. Anyway, but yeah, I think
steampunk is it's
anyway.
Yeah.
Point being that there is a lot of genres that have different things that you don't even know exist until later. For example, there is also the genre called cyberpunk. And cyberpunk is basically where it's futuristic, but specifically geared around computers and things like that. So, yeah. All right.
And steampunk is like engineering.
Steampunk is more Victorian era, specifically with steam engines. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's kind of wild. There, if you want, I actually have a video on the American Folk Library YouTube channel talking about all the different fantasy genres.
Ooh, yeah.
And I defined all of them.
Yeah.
So feel free to look at that one.
I want that one.
I literally just talked for an hour about this is what this one is, and this is what this one is. And it's fancy. All right. Any other questions that we have before I turn the video off and just free write time?
Nope, we're chilling.
I will turn it off then, and we will call that good for the day. Oh, reminder real quick, all story entries are due by July 31st. Not June, July. So no need to panic. You have another month. But please, if you are interested at all, feel free to ask me questions.
I'm just gonna insert